Last weekend, the world watched as the U.S. launched a bold military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. President Trump called it a total success, but conflicting reports have sparked heated debates. What really happened and why? Let's dive into the full story.
President Trump saying that U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities obliterated their targets.
I think it's been completely demolished.
Do you believe that Iran can rebuild its nuclear program?
Iran will never rebuild its nuclear. From there? Absolutely not. That place is under rock. That place is demolished.
President Trump was confident, claiming the strikes at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan wiped out Iran's nuclear program for good. The operation, dubbed Midnight Hammer, used massive 30,000-pound bunker-buster bombs dropped by B-2 bombers. Why did the U.S. strike? Tensions with Iran have simmered for years over its nuclear ambitions. Trump cited Israeli intelligence suggesting Iran was close to a nuclear weapon, though U.S. intelligence was less certain. At a NATO summit, Trump framed the strike as a decisive move to ensure Iran never goes nuclear.
You just cited Israeli intelligence on these attacks. Earlier, you said U.S. intelligence was inconclusive. Are you relying on Israeli intelligence for your assessment of the impact of the strikes?
No, this is also Iran made the statement. And it's also, if you read the document that was given, that Pete can talk about if you'd like, the document said it could be very severe damage, but they didn't take that. They said it could be limited or it could be very severe. They really didn't know, other than to say it could be limited or it could be very, very severe. And you didn't choose to put that because it was very early after. Since then, we've collected additional intelligence. We've also spoken to people who have seen the site. And the site is obliterated, and we think everything nuclear is down there. They didn't take it out.
NATO is thrilled with Trump's B-2 strike on Iran. They are thrilled, and what an honor for them to hear it kind of debrief there. Key points, high altitude strikes, 52,000 feet. Clearly, Natanz, the conversion facility where 2 MOPs hit, absolutely wiped out. And then at Fordo, it was an underground inferno caused by the 6 MOPs going into each of 2 aim points. Thank you, weaponeering officers at Whiteman Air Force Base, 509th Bomb Wing, whatever captains and majors you are that did that. You got it perfect. And that means that it is basically a burned out rubble. He talked about seeing the flares of that fire up around the surface. So much that he told us. And it really backs up his statement that that facility was obliterated and that Iran basically cannot enrich and continue with a weapons program at this point.
So cannot is one thing, don't want to is another thing. Yet the president did say a number of statements alluding to the fact that Iran doesn't want to keep enriching. He said the following: I think they've had it, not going to do it again. Last thing they want to do is enrich. They're not going to enrich. So basically reassurances that they are not going to build a bomb. What did you make of that?
That Iran was just shocked. Their leadership was just shocked and devastated by this B-2 attack, that they literally had no idea that the B-2s and American military power could do that to them. Now, are they still dangerous? Yes, and he alluded to that. They'll have their missiles. I hope they stop it with the terrorists. There's still an ideological, theological regime. There's still thugs. There's still a problem. But he has removed Iran as a nuclear threat. NATO is thrilled. You know, the missiles reach NATO. Iran's missiles can reach NATO. There's a whole Aegis Ashore facility in Poland that was built to counter the Iranian missile threat years ago. So this is just, it is a complete change. He has taken out an emergent nuclear power and the whole world is safer. And the NATO allies are really glad to have President Trump's leadership.
NATO allies, led by Secretary General Mark Rutte, praised Trump's leadership. The strikes showcased U.S. military precision, targeting deeply fortified sites. But was the damage as devastating as claimed?
This is the first assessment that we are getting that the U.S. intelligence community has found about the battle damage that resulted from those U.S. military strikes on these 3 Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. And as you said, it was produced by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's intelligence arm. And it is worth noting that it is a very early assessment. The strikes were only a matter of days ago, and the intelligence community is still gathering intelligence. They are still working to come up with a full, comprehensive picture of what exactly happened here. But but based on a battle damage assessment that was carried out by U.S. Central Command, essentially looking at the images and looking at what was actually damaged, the Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months. Now, we presented this information to the White House for comment, and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, she did acknowledge the existence of this assessment, but she said in a statement that the administration disagrees with it. She said, quote, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community. The leaking of this alleged assessment is a clear attempt to demean President Trump and discredit the brave fighter pilots who conducted a perfectly executed mission to obliterate Iran's nuclear program. Everyone knows what happens when you drop 14 30,000-pound bombs perfectly on their targets, total obliteration." Now, it is worth noting here that there has been dissent, I should say, within the intelligence community, within the defense community, about just how much of an impact these massive bunker buster bombs would actually have on Iran's nuclear facilities. It was far from certain, given that these bombs had never been tested in an actual combat scenario, whether they would actually penetrate those very, very deep underground tunnels that lie underneath these nuclear facilities. And what we are told is that as of now, this Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, it does conclude at this point, again, it is still very early, that those underground facilities, including the centrifuges, including the highly enriched uranium that everyone has been talking so much about, those are largely intact. Now, of course, this does stand at odds with what President Donald Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth have been saying in recent days about the impact of these U.S. military strikes.
The conclusion is that the damage must be, very, very, very important.
So, what's the truth? The strikes dealt a blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions, but the extent of the damage remains unclear. Trump's team insists the mission was a triumph, while critics argue it fell short. Meanwhile, the strikes have shifted Middle East dynamics. One thing's certain, this story is far from over.